The Galactic Academy of Sciences prided itself on being the most prestigious learning institution in the known universe. Its massive crystal dome housed students from over 300 different species, all gathered to study the wonders of life across the stars. Professor Taewon adjusted his breathing apparatus as he entered the lecture hall. His gray scales shimmered under the soft blue lights designed to accommodate the various visual sensitivities of his students. As the leading xenobiologist in the Orion Arm, he commanded respect with his mere presence. "Good morning, class," he said, his translator converting his natural clicks and whistles into standard galactic common. "Today we begin our unit on predator-prey relationships across evolutionary histories." The classroom buzzed with the sounds of students settling in, the soft whirring of hover chairs, the clicking of data tablets, and the occasional hiss of an environmental suit adjusting to the room's atmosphere. In the front row sat Dae-hyun, a proximan whose 6 eyes blinked in perfect sequence. Behind him, Haeun's tentacles carefully arranged her notes, the suckers on her appendages delicately handling the thin screens. Scattered throughout were Centaurians, Rigelians, and even a pair of crystalline Aldebarans whose bodies refracted the light into tiny rainbows on the walls. And in the back row, partially hidden by the hulking form of a Jovian student, sat Jinho, the only human in the class. "Before we begin," Professor Taewon continued, "I must warn you that today's lesson may trigger instinctual fear responses in some of you. There is no shame in this. Evolution has programmed your nervous systems to react to certain stimuli. Understanding these reactions is part of understanding yourselves." He tapped his control panel and the room darkened. A holographic display appeared above his desk, showing a chart of various species and their threat response systems. "Fear," the professor said, "is perhaps the most universal emotion in the galaxy. It transcends biological differences. It exists wherever life has had to survive other life that wishes to consume it." Jinho leaned forward, interested. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 70 years ago. Their biology was still something of a curiosity to many species. Today I will play for you recordings of various apex predators from across known space. These sounds have been collected by brave xenobiologists, often at great personal risk. Some of you may find these sounds deeply disturbing. This is normal and expected. Professor Taewon's inner eyelids blinked slowly, a sign of seriousness in his species. If anyone feels overwhelmed, you may excuse yourself. However, I encourage you to stay. Facing fear in a controlled environment is an excellent way to understand it. He pressed another button on his console. "We will begin with something relatively mild, the hunting call of the Vesperian cave stalker." The sound that filled the room started as a low, rhythmic clicking that gradually increased in speed and pitch until it became a piercing screech that seemed to bounce off the walls. The effect on the class was immediate. Dae-hyun's 6 eyes widened in alarm, all pupils dilating at once. Haeun's tentacles curled protectively around her body. The Jovian student's massive form seemed to shrink, pulling inward as if trying to appear smaller. Professor Taewon nodded, observing their reactions with scientific interest. The cave stalker uses echolocation to find prey in the dark caverns of Vesperia. That final screech is what prey hears moments before attack. The sound itself causes a momentary paralysis in most Vesperian species, an evolutionary advantage for the predator. He tapped his console again. "Now let us move to something more intense. This is the mating call of the Jovian Leviathan, which also serves as a territorial warning to potential competitors and a fear signal to prey." The new sound was so deep that students felt it more than heard it, a rumbling that vibrated through the floor and up through their bodies. It built slowly into a roar so powerful that the air itself seemed to tremble. Several students visibly shuddered. A Rigelian in the 3rd row began to emit a defensive pheromone that made nearby students inch away. The Jovian student was now completely contracted into a defensive ball, all 6 of his arms wrapped around his central mass. "Fascinating response," the professor noted, looking at the Jovian. "Even though Giho here is from a completely different region of Jupiter than the Leviathan, the evolutionary response remains coded in his genetics." Professor Taewon seemed pleased with the class's reactions. "Now we will experience something truly primal." This next recording comes from the death hunter of Draconis Prime, a creature so feared that the native species developed sentience primarily as a defense mechanism against it. The room fell. completely silent in anticipation. Even the environmental system seemed to quiet down. The sound began as a deep, almost subsonic growl that humans could barely perceive, but that most alien species felt as a wave of dread washing over them. It built slowly, adding layers of snarling and clicking until it culminated in a roar so complex and terrifying that it seemed to reach into the primitive brain of every species present. The reaction was dramatic. Daehyun fell out of his chair, all 6 eyes rolled back. Heian's skin changed from its normal purple to a sickly white, her tentacles rigid with fear. The crystalline Aldebarans actually cracked slightly, fine lines appearing across their normally perfect surfaces. Professor Taewon himself seemed affected, his scales flattening against his body in an instinctual attempt to appear less visible. But from the back of the room came an unexpected sound, so out of place that at first, many students didn't recognize what it was. Laughter, human laughter. All heads turned to see Jin-ho, the human student with one hand covering his mouth, clearly trying to suppress his amusement but failing. The professor's inner eyelids blinked rapidly in confusion. He switched off the recording. "Jin-ho," he said, his translator struggling to convey his mix of surprise and scientific curiosity. "You find the Death Hunter's call amusing?" Jin-ho's face reddened as he realized all attention was now on him. "I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't mean to be disrespectful." "I'm not offended," Professor Taewon assured him. "I'm intrigued. Please explain your reaction." Jin-ho shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's just, that sound is almost exactly like my neighbor's cat when someone steps on its tail. Back on Earth, I mean." A murmur ran through the classroom. The idea that one of the most feared sounds in the galaxy resembled a small Earth pet was either absurd or deeply concerning, depending on one's perspective. "A cat?" Professor Taewon repeated, his scientific curiosity now fully engaged. "One of your domesticated predator companions?" "Yes, sir," Jin-ho nodded. "A house cat, about this big." He held his hands about a foot apart. The Jovian student Gi-ho had partially uncurled himself. "Your species keeps predators as companions?" His translator conveyed his disbelief. "Several kinds, actually," Jin-ho explained. "Cats, dogs, some birds of prey. They're quite small, though, and domesticated over thousands of years." Professor Taewon's scales now rippled with excitement, a sign of intense interest among his species. "Fascinating. Jin-ho, would you be willing to share more about human relationships with predator species in our next class?" Before Jin-ho could answer, Daehyun had recovered enough to speak. "Professor, are you suggesting that humans are not affected by predator fear responses?" "That's impossible. Fear is universal." "Not universal in its triggers, perhaps," the professor mused. "Jin-ho, did any of our recordings cause you fear?" Jin-ho thought for a moment. "They were interesting, and I could see how they might be scary in the right context. But no, not really afraid, sorry." The classroom erupted in whispers and clicks and various other species-specific sounds of disbelief and concern. Professor Taewon raised a clawed hand for silence. "Class, I believe we have stumbled upon an excellent research opportunity. The human fear response may be quite different from what we understand in other species." He looked directly at Jin-ho with all 4 of his eyes. "Young human, you have just made our study of evolutionary biology much more interesting." Word of Jin-ho's unusual reaction spread through the academy faster than a quantum transmission. By lunchtime, students from all departments were stealing glances at the lone human as he sat in the cafeteria, trying to enjoy his meal substitute designed to mimic Earth food. "May I join you?" asked a melodic voice. Jin-ho looked up to see Mireille, a slender Arcturian whose pale blue skin seemed to glow from within. Her forearms carried a tray of nutrient cubes that shifted colors as they reacted to the air. "Of course," Jin-ho said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. Mireille sat down gracefully. "Everyone is talking about what happened in Professor Taewon's class." Jin-ho sighed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was just a natural reaction." "No one thinks you caused trouble," Mireille assured him, her large, pupil-less eyes blinking slowly. "We're just curious. Most species have deep-seated fear responses to predator sounds. It's a survival mechanism. Humans have fear responses too," Jin-ho explained, pushing his food around with his fork. "Just to different things, I guess." "Like what?" Mireille asked, genuinely interested. Before Jin-ho could answer, a shadow fell across their table. Hyun-ki, a Centaurian third-year student, stood there with his study group. His iridescent skin rippled with colors that betrayed his emotional state, currently a mix of curiosity and challenge. "So you're the fearless human," Hyun-ki said, his forearms crossed over his chest. "The one who laughs at death hunters." Jin-ho put down his fork. "I'm not fearless. I just wasn't scared of that particular sound." Hyun-ki made a clicking sound that his translator didn't bother to convert, clearly some kind of Centaurian expression of disbelief. "Humans are strange creatures," said Do-yun, a Proximan female standing beside Hyun-ki. Her 6 eyes blinked in sequence as she studied Jin-ho. "Your species is physically weak compared to most sentient life forms, yet you act as if you fear nothing." "That's not true," Jin-ho protested. "We fear plenty of things, and like what?" challenged Hyun-ki. Jin-ho thought for a moment. "Heights, the dark, deep water, being alone, being in crowds, the future, the past. There are lots of human fears." "But not predators?" asked Do-yun, her head tilting in confusion. "Some predators, sure," Jin-ho said. "But most dangerous animals on Earth are either extinct or contained. We haven't had to worry about being eaten for thousands of years." The alien students exchanged glances, their various biological features expressing a mix of disbelief and fascination. "Perhaps," said Hyun-ki, leaning forward, "you would be willing to prove your species' unusual courage?" Mirei's skin darkened slightly, a warning sign. "Hyun-ki, don't start trouble." "No trouble," Hyun-ki said, his skin flashing patterns of innocence that fooled no one. "Just scientific inquiry. The Academy's simulation chamber can recreate any environment, including predator encounters. It's used for ranger training and xenobiology research." Jin-ho frowned. "Are you challenging me to some kind of test?" "A simple experiment," Hyun-ki clarified. "To see how a human responds to actual predator situations, not just sounds." "For science, and if I refuse?" Jin-ho asked. Do-yun's mandibles clicked softly. "Then we would understand. After all, bravery in a classroom is one thing. Facing even a simulation of real danger is another." Jin-ho felt trapped. He knew they were baiting him, but he also felt a responsibility to represent humans well. Earth was still proving itself worthy of its place in the galactic community. "Fine," he said finally, "but I choose the parameters. Half the scenarios will be of your choosing, half of ours," Hyun-ki countered. "That seems fair." Mirei put one of her 4 hands on Jin-ho's arm. "You don't have to do this. They're just trying to embarrass you." Jin-ho gave her a small smile. "It's okay. I'm actually curious myself now. Maybe we'll all learn something." "Tonight, after final meal," Hyun-ki decided. "The simulation chamber in the East Wing is usually empty then. Isn't that against Academy rules?" Mirei asked. "Using the equipment without supervision?" Hyun-ki's skin rippled with dismissive colors. "I have access. I'm a teaching assistant for advanced planetary ecosystems. This counts as research." After Hyun-ki and his group left, Mirei looked at Jin-ho with concern. "Are you sure about this? The simulation chamber can create very realistic scenarios. The fear responses it triggers are genuine." Jin-ho nodded. "I'll be fine. Besides, I'm curious too. Maybe humans really do process fear differently." "I'll come with you," Mirei decided. "Someone should monitor the equipment who doesn't have an agenda." The simulation chamber was an impressive piece of technology, a large spherical room whose walls could generate any environment, with perfect sensory detail. When Jin-ho arrived that evening, Hyun-ki was already there with Do-yun and several other students from various species. "I brought witnesses," Hyun-ki explained, his skin patterns showing excitement. "For the experiment, I brought Mirei," Jin-ho countered. "To make sure the experiment is fair," Mirei stepped forward. "I've reviewed the simulation protocols. The safety measures are all active. Nothing in the chamber can cause actual physical harm, though the sensory experiences will feel completely real." "How does this work?" Jin-ho asked, looking at the featureless white sphere. "You'll stand in the center," Mirei explained. "The chamber will create environments and scenarios around you. Your reactions will be monitored and recorded for later analysis." "What's the goal?" Jin-ho asked Hyun-ki directly. "To see at what point a human shows fear response," Hyun-ki said. "We'll start with mild threats and increase the danger level." "And how do you measure fear?" Do-yun stepped forward holding a small device. "This will monitor your vital signs: heart rate, perspiration, pupil dilation, adrenaline levels. standard fear markers across most carbon-based life forms. Jinho nodded and allowed her to attach the small sensor to his neck. "Ready?" Hyunki asked, moving to the control panel. Jinho took a deep breath and walked to the center of the chamber. "Ready?" The door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. For a moment, he stood in complete whiteness. Then the chamber hummed to life and the world around him transformed. He found himself standing in a dense jungle. The air was thick with humidity and strange scents. Massive trees towered overhead, their canopies blocking most of the light from the alien sun. Sounds of unknown creatures echoed through the foliage. "Scenario 1, came Hyun-Ki's voice from nowhere and everywhere. "Vesperian jungle, a known hunting ground for cave stalkers. Your goal is to reach the clearing 1 kilometer north." Jinho looked around, getting his bearings. The simulation was incredibly realistic. He could feel the squelch of moist soil beneath his boots, smell the strange alien vegetation, even feel insects buzzing past his ears. He began walking carefully, trying to remember what he knew about cave stalkers from class. They hunted by sound using echolocation. They preferred to ambush from above. A clicking sound came from somewhere to his left. Jinho froze, listening. The clicking grew faster, just like the recording from class. Instead of running, Jinho picked up a nearby stick and broke it with a loud snap. The clicking stopped immediately. "Interesting," came Do-Yun's voice. "He's creating a diversion sound." Jinho continued forward, making occasional loud noises to confuse the predator's echolocation. He reached the clearing without incident. "Scenario complete," announced Hyun-Ki, sounding slightly disappointed. "Vital signs show elevated alertness but no panic response." The jungle dissolved around Jinho, returning to the white sphere for a moment before transforming again. This time he stood on a rocky plain under twin suns. The heat was intense and the horizon shimmered with mirages. "Scenario 2, Hyun-Ki announced. "Rigelian Badlands, home to pack hunters known as spine wolves. Your goal is to reach the rock formation 2 kilometers east." Jinho had barely taken 10 steps when he heard the howling. It came from multiple directions, the eerie, harmonizing howls of creatures hunting as a unit. In the distance, he could see dust clouds as they approached. Instead of running, which would trigger their chase instinct, Jinho quickly gathered rocks and climbed onto a large boulder. When the first spine wolf appeared, a lean, 6-legged creature with a ridge of sharp spines along its back, Jinho threw a rock near it but not at it. The creature jumped, startled, and the pack hesitated. Jinho used this moment to move from boulder to boulder, using the high ground to his advantage. "His heart rate is elevated," reported Do-Yun, "but still within normal parameters for physical exertion." "No fear spike." "Increase difficulty," ordered Hyun-Ki. "Scenario 3. The rocky landscape dissolved around Jinho, replaced by complete darkness. The temperature dropped sharply and his breath formed clouds in front of his face. He could feel solid ice beneath his feet but could see nothing beyond a few inches. "Scenario 3, Hyun-Ki's voice announced, now with a hint of determination. "Europa Deep Ice Caverns, home to the blind leviathans. Your goal is to find the air pocket within the ice maze. You have 15 minutes before your simulated oxygen runs out." Jinho stood still, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. Tiny bioluminescent particles in the ice provided just enough light to make out vague shapes. The silence was absolute, pressing against his ears like a physical force. Then he heard it, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound of something massive moving through water behind the ice walls. "That's a blind leviathan," Mirei's voice explained. "They hunt by sensing vibrations through the ice." Jinho nodded, though he wasn't sure if they could see him. He began to move slowly, placing each foot with deliberate care to minimize vibrations. The pulsing sound grew louder, then faded as the creature moved past him. He navigated through the twisting ice tunnels, occasionally stopping completely when the pulsing returned. Twice he saw enormous shadows pass behind translucent ice walls, creatures the size of earth whales, with rows of sensing organs where eyes should be. "His technique is interesting," Do-Yun observed. "He's moving in rhythm with the Leviathan's pulses to mask his own movements." "Vital signs?" Hyun-Ki demanded. "Elevated heart rate but consistent with concentration, not panic," Do-Yun replied, sounding slightly impressed. "Body temperature normal despite the cold environment." Jinho found the air pocket, a small cave with glowing blue moss, with 3 minutes to spare. "Scenario complete," Hyun-Ki announced, unable to hide his frustration. "Preparing Scenario 4. The ice caverns melted away. Jinho now stood in a vast desert under a blood-red sky. 3 moons hung low on the horizon, casting multiple shadows across the sand. The heat was intense and the air smelled of metal and sulfur. Scenario 4, Hyun-Ki said. Draconis Prime, the hunting grounds of the Death Hunter. Jinho felt his stomach tighten. This was the creature whose roar had made him laugh in class, not because it wasn't dangerous, but because the sound reminded him of something familiar. Your goal is simple survival, Hyun-Ki continued. Last 5 minutes without being detected. The simulation began with an eerie silence. Jinho scanned his surroundings looking for cover. The landscape offered little, just sand dunes and occasional rock formations. In the distance, he spotted what looked like a dried riverbed with some scrubby vegetation. He began moving toward it, keeping low and watching for movement. The sand made walking difficult, and each step left obvious footprints. A low, rumbling growl rolled across the desert, the same sound from class. But this time it wasn't coming from speakers. It was coming from behind a nearby dune. Jinho froze. The growl came again, closer now. He could feel vibrations in the sand beneath his feet. Heart rate increasing, Do-Yun reported. Adrenaline levels rising. Jinho looked around desperately for something, anything he could use. His eyes fell on a patch of the scrubby plants. He ran to them, pulled several up by the roots, and began rubbing them between his hands. They released a strong, pungent oil. What is he doing? Hyun-Ki asked, masking his scent. I think, Mireille replied. Jinho rubbed the oil over his clothes and skin, then lay flat in the dried riverbed, pulling sand over himself until only his face was exposed. The growling grew louder. From his hiding place, Jinho could now see the creature cresting a dune. A massive, 6-limbed predator with a triangular head and skin that shifted colors to match its surroundings, like a terrestrial chameleon but far more effective. The Death Hunter paused, its head swinging back and forth as it tested the air. It had followed Jinho's tracks to the plants, but the scent trail ended there. Remarkable, Mireille whispered. He's using the plant's scent to confuse the hunter's olfactory senses. The Death Hunter circled the area, growing increasingly agitated. It let out the full roar they had heard in class, a complex, terrifying sound that seemed to shake the very air. Jinho remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing, watching the creature through barely open eyes. His heart rate is definitely elevated now, Do-Yun reported, but still no panic response. He's maintaining controlled breathing. The Death Hunter made one more circuit of the area, then moved off, following some other scent or sound. 5 minutes complete, Mireille announced. Scenario successful. The desert faded away, returning to the white sphere. Jinho stood up, brushing simulated sand from his clothes. Enough games, Hyun-Ki said, his voice tight with frustration. Final scenario. The chamber darkened completely. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, a dim light revealed that Jinho was standing in what appeared to be the corridor of a derelict spacecraft. Emergency lights flickered, casting moving shadows. The air was cold and stale. Scenario 5, Hyun-Ki announced. Abandoned research vessel Prometheus. Your goal is to reach the escape pod at the far end of the ship. Jinho recognized the setup immediately. This is from a human horror film, he said. About a creature that hunts humans on a spaceship. Yes, Hyun-Ki confirmed. We thought perhaps a human-designed nightmare might be more effective. Jinho began moving cautiously down the corridor. The ship creaked and groaned around him, metal contracting in the cold of space. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Torn cables sparked from damaged wall panels. What exactly am I facing here? Jinho asked. The ship's research specimen escaped containment, Mireille explained. It's a genetically engineered predator designed to adapt to any environment. Jinho nodded and continued forward. He passed laboratories with broken equipment and crew quarters with signs of hasty evacuation. The further he went, the more damage he encountered. Claw marks on walls, acid burns on the floor, and dark stains that looked disturbingly like blood. A skittering sound came from an air vent above him. Jinho pressed himself against the wall, watching as the vent cover slowly, deliberately opened. Now we'll see some fear, Hyun-Ki murmured. A long, segmented limb with a sharp, blade-like end emerged from the vent, feeling the air. It was followed by another and another. Jinho's breathing quickened. His eyes darted around, looking for weapons or escape routes. The corridor ahead was blocked by debris, and the only side passage led to a dark room with unknown dangers. Heart rate significantly elevated, Do-Yun reported. Adrenaline spiking. The creature dropped from the vent, a nightmare of chitin and teeth and too many limbs. It moved with terrible speed and purpose, directly toward Jinho. For the first time, Jinho ran. He darted into the side room, slamming the door control behind him. The creature crashed against the door, its limbs probing the edges, looking for weakness. The room was a mess hall, tables overturned and food long rotted. Jinho grabbed a metal tray as a makeshift shield and a kitchen knife as a weapon. His hand shook slightly. Definite fear response now, Do-Yun said, sounding satisfied. Pupil dilation, elevated cortisol levels. The door began to buckle as the creature hammered against it. Jinho backed away, knife held ready. Should we end the simulation? Mirai asked, concerned. Not yet, Hyunki insisted. Let's see how he handles actual fear. The door gave way with the screech of tearing metal. The creature burst through, its multiple eyes fixed on Jinho. It let out a high-pitched shriek that made everyone watching wince. Jinho's face showed clear fear now. But instead of freezing or panicking, something else happened. His expression hardened. His stance widened. His grip on the knife tightened. What's happening? Hyunki asked, confused. His fear markers are still high, but he's not running, Mirai observed. He's preparing to fight, the creature charged. Jinho met it with a yell of his own, a primal sound that surprised even him. He slashed with the knife, catching one of the creature's limbs. Black fluid sprayed across the floor. The creature recoiled, then circled, more cautious now. Jinho kept the tray between them, backing toward another door at the far end of the mess hall. This is fascinating, Mirai said. He's terrified, but the fear isn't paralyzing him. It's energizing him. Jinho reached the door and slammed the control panel. Nothing happened, the power was out. The creature sensed his predicament and moved in for the kill. In a desperate move, Jinho threw the tray at the creature's eyes and dove under a table. The creature's claws raked the metal where he had been standing a moment before. End simulation, Mirai called out. He's proven enough. Not yet, Hyunki insisted. He hasn't reached the escape pod. Jinho crawled between tables, staying low, using the furniture as obstacles to slow the creature. He spotted a maintenance panel in the floor and quickly pried it open with the knife. He's going into the maintenance tunnels, Do-Yun observed. Smart. Jinho dropped into the narrow space below the floor just as the creature overturned the table he had been hiding behind. He began crawling through the cramped tunnel, using the knife to pry open grates when he needed to change direction. He's still afraid, Mirai noted, watching his vital signs. But he's thinking clearly, problem-solving under extreme stress. After several tense minutes of navigating the maintenance tunnels, with the creature occasionally smashing through the floor panels above him, Jinho emerged in the escape pod bay. He slammed his hand on the launch control and collapsed into the pod seat as the door sealed behind him. Scenario complete, the system announced automatically. The simulation dissolved, leaving Jinho sitting on the floor of the white sphere, breathing hard, still clutching the now-vanished knife. The door to the simulation chamber slid open. Jinho sat on the floor, his shirt damp with sweat, his breathing still heavy. He looked up to see the group of alien students staring at him with expressions that ranged from amazement to confusion to newfound respect. Mirai was the first to approach, offering a hand to help him up. Are you all right? Jinho nodded, accepting her help. I'm fine. That last one was quite intense. Hyunki stood by the control panel, his skin shifting through patterns of blue and green, colors that indicated deep thought in his species. You were afraid, he said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. Of course I was afraid, Jinho replied, straightening his clothes. That thing was terrifying. But you didn't freeze, Do-Yun observed, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. You didn't panic, Jinho shrugged. Freezing wouldn't have helped me survive. The group moved to a small conference room adjacent to the simulation chamber. The walls displayed Jinho's vital signs during each scenario: heart rate, adrenaline levels, cortisol spikes. The evidence of his fear was clear in the data. I don't understand, said Giho, the Jovian student who had contracted into a defensive ball during class. He had unfolded now, his 6 arms gesturing in confusion. If you felt fear, why did you laugh at the Death Hunter's roar in class? Jinho sat down, accepting a cup of water from Mirai. Because hearing a recording in a safe classroom is completely different from facing the actual creature in a survival situation. But most species feel fear even at recordings, Do-Yun pointed out. It's an automatic response. Humans can separate the feeling from the response, Jinho tried to explain. We can feel afraid but choose how to act on that fear. Professor Taewan's voice came from the doorway, surprising them all. Precisely the point I was hoping someone would discover. The students turned to see the professor standing there, his scales a calm shade of blue. Beside him stood Junseo, the head of the xenopsychology department, a tall, willowy being with 4 arms and skin that seemed to shift between solid and translucent. Professor? Hyunki's skin flushed with alarm patterns. We were just conducting a small experiment. Without proper authorization, Professor Taewan noted, but with fascinating results nonetheless. You knew about this? Mireille asked. Professor Taewan's inner eyelids blinked in amusement. The simulation chamber records all usage. I received an alert when it was activated after hours. Rather than shut it down, I invited Professor Junseo to observe with me. Junseo moved into the room with fluid grace. I've been studying human psychology since they joined the galactic community. Their fear responses have always been unusual. Jinho looked up at the new professor. Unusual how? Junseo gestured to the data displays. Most sentient species evolved from prey animals. Their fear response is automatic and overwhelming. Freeze, flee, or in some cases flock together for protection. But humans evolved as persistence predators, Professor Taewan continued. Not the strongest or fastest predators, but among the most adaptable and enduring. Jinho nodded slowly. On Earth, early humans would chase animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. We can't outrun most predators, but we can outlast almost anything over long distances. Precisely, Junseo said. And this evolutionary history shaped your fear response. Humans don't just feel fear. They process it, analyze it, and often use it. The alien students looked at Jinho with new understanding. That's why you laughed in class, Mireille realized. The sound triggered recognition, not fear. And why you could function even when terrified in the final simulation, Do-Yun added. Your species uses fear as information rather than allowing it to control your actions. Professor Taewan moved to the center of the room. This is why xenobiology is so fascinating. Each species' evolutionary path shapes not just their bodies, but their minds and behaviors. He turned to Jinho. When you laughed in my class, I wasn't offended. I was intrigued. Humans process fear differently than most species we've encountered. You can acknowledge danger without being paralyzed by it. Jinho thought about this. It's not that we don't feel fear. We definitely do. But we've also developed the ability to think through it, to problem solve while afraid. A valuable adaptation, Junseo noted, and one that explains much about your species' rapid advancement despite your physical limitations. Hyun-Ki stepped forward, his skin now showing patterns of contrition. I owe you an apology, Jinho. I thought you were being disrespectful in class or trying to appear braver than you are. No apology needed, Jinho said. I learned something about myself, too. Professor Taewan addressed the whole group. There's an important lesson here beyond xenobiology. Understanding how different species perceive and respond to the same stimuli is crucial for meaningful interstellar cooperation. He gestured to the data displays. Jinho wasn't fearless, his body showed clear fear responses. But his species has evolved to use fear rather than be controlled by it. This doesn't make humans better or worse than other species, just different with their own strengths and vulnerabilities. Junseo nodded in agreement. For instance, humans are unusually vulnerable to psychological fears. Abstract threats that never materialize, social rejection, existential dread. These can paralyze humans in ways that physical dangers often don't. Jinho laughed softly. That's true. I'd rather face that simulated monster again than give a speech in front of the whole academy. This comment drew curious looks from the alien students. Social anxiety, Junseo explained to them. A uniquely developed fear in highly social species. Professor Taewan turned to Hyun-Ki and the others. While I cannot condone unauthorized use of academy equipment, I am impressed by your scientific curiosity. Perhaps we can channel this energy into a proper research project. Hyun-Ki's skin brightened with excitement. A comparative study of fear responses across species? Precisely, the professor confirmed. With Jinho's permission, of course, Jinho nodded. I'd be happy to help. Though maybe with less terrifying simulations next time. I have a question, Mireille said, looking at Jinho. If humans can process fear this way, does that mean you don't have instinctive fear responses at all? Jinho thought for a moment. We do have some. Sudden loud noises make us jump. Falling makes our stomachs drop. Certain shapes and movements, like snakes and spiders, trigger immediate reactions in many humans. Evolutionary holdovers, Professor Junseo noted. Threats that were significant during your species' development. But we can overcome most of these with exposure and training, Jinho added. Humans can learn to jump out of flying vehicles for fun, handle venomous creatures, or dive into deep water, all things that might naturally frighten us. Professor Taewon's scales rippled with excitement. This adaptability is what makes humans such interesting subjects of study. Your species can reprogram your own fear responses to suit new environments, a valuable trait for space exploration. Du-Yun's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Is that why humans were able to spread to so many different planets so quickly, after achieving faster-than-light travel? Partly, Jinho confirmed. We're good at adapting to new environments, both physically and psychologically. Professor Junseo moved toward the door. I believe we have the beginnings of an excellent research paper here. With your permission, Professor Taewon, I'd like to include this impromptu experiment in my ongoing study of comparative psychology. Of course, Professor Taewon agreed, and I think all the students involved should receive credit for their contributions. As the group began to disperse, Hyun-ki approached Jinho. His skin now displayed patterns of respect, swirling blues and purples that indicated sincere admiration in Centaurian culture. I misjudged you, he said simply, and perhaps humans in general. Jinho smiled. It's a natural mistake. We're still new to the galactic community. Would you be willing to tell me more about human fear responses? Hyun-ki asked. For the research project? Sure, Jinho agreed. And maybe you could explain Centaurian emotional displays to me? I'm still learning to read your color patterns. Hyun-ki's skin rippled with agreement colors, a fair exchange. As they left the room together, Mireille fell into step beside them. I think this is what the Academy was founded for, she said. Different species learning from each other, finding strength in our differences. Jinho nodded. And sometimes those differences start with something as simple as laughing at the wrong time in class. Professor Taewon, overhearing this as he followed behind them, made a sound that his translator rendered as a chuckle. In my many years of teaching, he said, I've found that the most important discoveries often begin with the unexpected. 1 week after the simulation experiment, the Academy's main lecture hall was filled to capacity. Students from all departments had gathered for a special presentation. The topic had spread through the Academy like wildfire. Comparative fear responses, the human anomaly. Jinho sat in the front row, feeling both nervous and proud. Beside him were Mireille, Hyun-ki, and the other students who had participated in the unauthorized experiment. What had begun as a challenge had transformed into a serious scientific inquiry. Professor Taewon stood at the podium, his scales a dignified shade of deep blue. Behind him, Professor Junseo prepared the visual aids with fluid movements of her forearms. Welcome, students and faculty, Professor Taewon began. Today we explore one of the most fundamental emotions across all sentient species, fear, and how evolutionary history shapes its expression. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display appeared above the stage. It showed brain scans of various species, including a human one, Jinho's, taken during the simulation. As you can see, Professor Junseo explained, pointing to the displays, the amygdala, or its equivalent, the fear center of the brain, activates in all species when confronted with danger. But what happens next varies dramatically. The display shifted to show comparative readings from the simulation experiment. In most species evolved from prey animals, Professor Taewon continued. Fear triggers immediate automatic responses, freezing, fleeing, or in some cases, flocking behavior. These responses bypass conscious thought. They are faster than thinking. He gestured to specific readings. Notice how our Jovian student's brain shows massive activation in the motor control regions, associated with defensive contraction. This happens before the conscious mind even processes what the threat is. Giho, the Jovian student, shifted slightly in his seat but seemed proud to be part of the demonstration. Similarly, Professor Junseo added, our Proximan participants show immediate activation of their flight response systems. Their bodies prepare to run before they consciously decide to do so. Du-Yun's 6 eyes blinked in acknowledgement. But observe the human pattern, Professor Taewon said, highlighting Jinho's brain scan. Fear activation occurs, but it's followed by increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the problem-solving region. The human brain processes fear as information rather than pure instruction. Jinho felt strange seeing his own brain activity displayed for the entire academy, but he also felt a sense of pride in representing his species. This is not to suggest that humans are fearless, Professor Junseo clarified. Far from it. Their physiological fear responses can be just as intense as any species. The difference lies in how that fear is processed and acted upon. Professor Taewon nodded, which brings us to our central question. Why did our human student laugh at predator sounds that caused distress in other species? The display changed to show audio wavelengths of the various predator calls from the original class. The answer lies in context, Professor Junseo explained. For most species, the sound itself triggers fear, regardless of context. But humans have evolved to evaluate context before responding. A predator sound in a safe classroom registers as interesting or even amusing rather than threatening. Jinho raised his hand, and Professor Taewon nodded for him to speak. It's also about familiarity, Jinho added. Many predator sounds from other worlds happen to resemble animals from Earth that humans have lived alongside for thousands of years. We've domesticated predators, studied them, and in many cases become the apex predators ourselves. An excellent point, Professor Taewon agreed, which leads us to our most fascinating discovery. The display shifted to show footage from Jinho's final simulation, the one with the engineered monster on the abandoned ship. The audience watched as Jinho clearly showed signs of fear, but continued to function, fight, and problem solve. Humans evolved as persistence predators, Professor Junseo explained. Not the strongest or fastest, but among the most enduring and adaptable. This evolutionary history created a species that uses fear as a tool, rather than being controlled by it. Professor Taewon expanded on this point. Most prey species evolved fear responses that prioritize immediate survival. Freeze to avoid detection, flee to escape, or in some cases, fight as a last resort. These responses are automatic because any delay meant death. But humans, Professor Junseo continued, evolved in a different niche. They needed to remain functional while afraid, to track prey over long distances, to face dangerous animals with primitive weapons, to solve problems under threat. Their fear response evolved to enhance awareness and focus, rather than trigger automatic escape behaviors. The display showed a timeline of human evolution, from early primates to modern humans, highlighting key adaptations. This doesn't make humans superior, Professor Taewon emphasized. Every species' fear response is adapted to their evolutionary history. Jovian contractile defense is perfect for their ancestral environment. Proximan flight speed is unmatched. Centaurian camouflage is extraordinary. Hyunki's skin rippled with colors of agreement. The point, Professor Junseo said, is that understanding these differences is crucial for interspecies cooperation. What one species perceives as danger, another might see as opportunity. What paralyzes one might energize another. The professors opened the floor for questions. A Rigelian student raised a limb. If humans process fear differently, does this make them more dangerous than other species? Jinho tensed slightly at the question, but Professor Taewon answered calmly. Not more dangerous, differently dangerous, perhaps. All sentient species have the capacity for both creation and destruction. Humans can remain functional in situations that might incapacitate other species with fear, but they are also vulnerable to psychological and social fears that other species might not experience. Another student, a crystalline Aldebaran, asked, "Does this mean humans don't experience instinctive fear at all?" Jinho stood to answer this one himself. We definitely have instinctive fears. Sudden loud noises make us jump. Heights make many humans dizzy with fear. Certain shapes and movements, like snakes and spiders, trigger immediate reactions. But, he continued, we can also overcome most of these fears through exposure and training. Humans can learn to jump from high places for fun, handle venomous creatures, or enter dangerous environments, all by using our conscious minds to override our instinctive responses. Professor Junseo nodded. This adaptability is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of human psychology. They can reprogram their own fear responses to suit new environments, a valuable trait for space exploration and colonization. As the presentation continued, Jinho noticed something changing in the room. The way the other students looked at him was different now, not with suspicion or confusion, but with genuine interest and respect. After the formal presentation ended, students gathered in small groups to discuss what they had learned. Jinho found himself surrounded by curious classmates from various species, all eager to ask questions about human psychology. "Is it true that humans deliberately seek out fear for entertainment?" asked a proximate student. Jinho nodded. "We have things called horror movies and thrill rides that are designed specifically to trigger fear responses in safe environments. Many humans enjoy the sensation." "That's bizarre," the student replied, mandibles clicking in confusion. "Different evolutionary paths, different experiences," Jinho explained with a smile. Hyun-ki approached, his skin displaying friendly colors. "The Academy Council was impressed with our research. They've approved funding for an expanded study." "That's great news," Jinho said. "They want to include more human subjects," Hyun-ki continued, "to see if your responses are typical of your species or if there's significant variation." "There's definitely variation," Jinho assured him. "Some humans are naturally more fearful than others. Some have specific phobias. We're not all the same." Mireille joined them, her blue skin glowing softly with excitement. "The Xenopsychology department has proposed a new course on human psychology for next semester. They've asked if you would be willing to assist, Jinho." Jinho looked surprised. "Me? I'm not an expert. I'm just a student. But you're the only human at the academy," she pointed out. "Your perspective is valuable." Professor Taewon approached their group, his scales now a relaxed shade of green. "I have something to show you all," he said, leading them to a small display screen near the exit. On the screen was a message from the Galactic Science Council, the highest scientific authority in known space. They had reviewed the preliminary findings and were requesting a full report on human fear responses. "For the Galactic Archives, your little classroom incident has sparked interest throughout the scientific community," Professor Taewon told Jinho. "Sometimes the most important discoveries begin with something as simple as laughing at the wrong time." Jinho felt a surge of pride, not just for himself, but for his species. What had begun as an embarrassing moment had led to greater understanding between different forms of life. "There's an old human saying," Jinho told the group. "Understanding is the beginning of acceptance." Hyun-ki's skin rippled with curious colors. "And what comes after acceptance?" Jinho smiled. "Friendship, cooperation, maybe even wisdom." As they left the lecture hall together, human, Arcturian, Centaurian, Proximan, and others, Jinho realized that fear, the very emotion that had separated them initially, had ultimately brought them closer together through understanding. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all.